should we start meeting weekly? They all said, yes, please. Now, I've offered them an out. Every Wednesday at 12:30, about 15 to 18 city leaders are on a call with me, getting a brief on COVID, but talking about their interdependencies. That's, again, I list them, universities. So we headed off potential tensions between schools going back and the unions, right? We knew schools were going to go back. We had the unions. Let's say, let's avoid the division that happened at a national level. Let's get the unions talking to the school leaders about the conditions for teachers to go back into the classroom. They had that chat. It wasn't a big epic event. It's just about being human.
Sure, exactly. So how long, you described this process, built the One Bristol plan, which you're now maximizing with the weekly calls. When did you start it? How long did it take? And did you start from a situation where people were quite distrustful of government?
Oh, people are always distrustful of government, but I think, part of my life, I come from, I suppose, areas of deprivation and that my background. So I generally quite challenging. My mum still lives in the same house I moved to in 1978, right, on Stapleton Road. She's on a retired nursery nurse on a substandard pension. One of my points to city leaders is, my mum hasn't got time for you to indulge your cynicism. If you're paid over £100,000 a year, you need to get yourself around the table and come up with a solution. That's what you're there for, right?
I hope you bring your mother out too to say that.
Yeah, and also kind of like the activist community. If, excuse my categorization here, but if you're a middle class activist role playing, living on the margins, but you don't really live on the margins, you're just, a climate activist. I don't have much patience for that. You've got to come up with some solutions, and we just drive people to solutions. In fact, I'd say we developed a culture. We called it make a big offer and then make a big ask. Don't just come to me and ask me for stuff. Come and make an offer to the city, and then tell me what you need from me to help you deliver that offer. If you just come with a shopping list of stuff, you're just like a toddler. I want. I want to know what you're going to do for inequality, domestic violence, joblessness, to bring hope, to drive the city's ambition. And then I want to invest in people that want to get stuff done. I can line up 10,000 people that want something from me. The line of people that want to actually get stuff done for other people is a lot shorter, but that's where I need to put my efforts. We started it as soon as I was elected. I had the idea some years ago, to be honest, about writing one plan. And I thought one of the best things I could ever do for Bristol is to work with the city to develop a plan that transcended the electoral cycle. So the city could begin to think and plan over 15, 20, 50, 30 years, rather than, okay, let's restart our story every 4 years. So that's what we've tried to do.
So it's not the mayor's plan, it's the people's plan. And so the people will carry this forward when you go on to greater governmental levels, as far as that goes.
It's the city plan, yeah, absolutely.
City plan, absolutely, that's really clever.
And people have said, what happens if you don't win the election? Well, I say, well, if I don't win the election, whoever comes in would have to go to the police, go to the health service, it's not me locking anyone in, because what's in the plan, I didn't write it. They'd have to go to all those sectors and say, I don't want to keep going with this work. And they'll be saying, we've been doing this for 5 years. We've been meeting, we've been working together. So it's not my plan. Although secretly, obviously, when it comes up to election time, if people like it, I want the credit for it. But I'm not saying that out publicly.
It's a balancing act. It's a balancing act, of course. And we'll vote for you if we could. You've talked a lot about housing in our conversation, and that's been a big feature of what you've done, obviously, from your own experience and what you've seen in Bristol. How do you deal with issues of not in my backyard, if you're going to be building housing that some neighborhoods might not like, and it's intertwined with race? What if you had to deal with it in your housing portfolio?
There's big challenges on there.
Yes.
So I'll give you an example. I went to there's an area called Hot Wells, and which is a very nice area, very big houses. I guess many of those houses would have been owned by people who did well out of Bristol's mercantile past as well. They look over the harbour and just down from Clifton with views up the gorge and the suspension bridge. There's a flyover built there. It was built in the 1960s. It's horrific. And we can knock that down, remove the road or build a tunnel if possible, and probably fit 2,000 home units down there. Good quality, you know, lovely, but, you know, good share affordable, 30 to 40% affordable. As a result of sharing that, which I thought people would welcome because it gets rid of a horrific road, I went to a community event in the church and they had to lock the doors. So many people were angry, not to keep them out, but they couldn't fit any more people in. So there's me on the stage by myself with about 400 local residents really angry about this proposal to build homes down there. Many people started with the line, "I've lived here for 30 years. I've had my house here for 35 years." I imagine this tweet will get around the world. But anyway, I do think to myself, well, good for you. We've got 12,000 people on the waiting list, 600 families in temporary accommodation. They haven't lived anywhere for 30 or 40 years, and we do need houses. So my point is that let's move upstream and let's see if we can come to some agreement on the challenge we're trying to take on. Don't assume that I'm evil or I just want to destroy Bristol and destroy anyone's lives. What we've got to do is agree on what the challenge is. And so I just went through the argument. I said, do we all agree that we have a housing crisis in the city? Everyone agrees, right? We agree it's not acceptable to have 12,000 families on the waiting list, or households on the waiting list, children without stable homes, families in bed and breakfast. We agree that, right? We do agree that, okay. So the next challenge is we've got to meet that housing crisis in the face of both a climate and an ecological emergency, right? Well, people agree that. So that means that we need to build in the middle of the city, higher density, active travel distance to major employment, entertainment, retail offers, and people agree that. Right, well, if that's the aim, then let's start looking at the trade-offs. So like someone said to me, why can't you put these houses on the edge of the city? Well, I said, well, then you're building in carbon dependency. So let's just agree that it's a wickedly challenging world, it's complicated, there's going to be a price we have to pay for everything. And let's understand this is the challenge I'm taking on. Now, if you disagree with my solution, building houses here, what is your solution? Because then we've got to start dealing with the consequences of the solution you're putting on the table. And often the consequences of is building houses in the least sustainable place on the edge of the city. Well, then you've got to own that. And you've got to stand up in front of the city and own that you're not prioritizing housing and you're prepared to put your houses in unsustainable locations rather than just pointing out where I've fallen. And that's what I try to do with people, go upstream, not to attack them, but let's work out what we can agree on and work out the point of departure, and then work out how we navigate that. But at least accept the fact that we're not evil. We're just trying to solve problems in a wickedly complicated world.
So then what happened?
Well,
the doors are locked. Talking to the folks.
Well, what happened in the actual meeting was, rather than me giving a speech at the beginning, I sat there while people basically made their points for about 50 minutes. And at the end, right. I made notes of all their points. I read their points out to them back. Where there were inaccuracies, I did suggest there were inaccuracies, and then set out the framework within which we're trying to solve the city's problems. Bristol has a housing crisis today. It's the least affordable of all the core cities. The city's going to grow by 100,000 people over the next 25 years. If we do not solve the housing crisis, I suggest that's going to come knocking at people's doors at some point, whether they're stepping over people in the street or there are housing riots because people can't afford to live in the city. There are consequences to everything. And the point was, inaction is not an option. So of all the actions we have to take, which action do you think is the best, both for you and Bristol as a whole? And you have to own the consequences of the position you take. Too often people have a position and don't own the consequences. It's a tweeted statement or a Facebook post or a placard, but there's a cost to everything. And we just try to make sure people contend with the fullness of their argument.
And housing is such an emotional issue, such an emotional issue.
But people need houses for their children as well, which is what we also remind people. You can't freeze frame a city at any point in time. What we need to do is the best quality, most sustainable, most pro-life, pro-nature community housing development that we can. But in the end, I spoke for 15 minutes and I had to go home to my children. And then you see the way that sometimes activism works. Someone said, well, he couldn't even be bothered to hang around to talk to us. I said, yeah, I'm the mayor, but I do have 3 children too, right? Right. I am going to go home at some point. But anytime you want to make it.
Are you still working on that project with the flyover? What's happening?
yeah, looking at the options.
Okay. It's
But
still a
again,
negotiation. Yeah.
well, we've got to build houses for people. You know, the aim is to build houses in the best possible way. And one of the points I've been making to communities and activist groups, the kinds of homes we build and the places we put them will be one of the biggest determinants of our planetary impact. Right.
Yes.
So again, building centrally, building more densely is there. I did actually take it to Extinction Rebellion. You have them in the United States as well, right? Big climate activist group. So it was a big climate group. They brought London to a gridlock, and I said, saying we need to save the planet is great, right? And shouting at government is easy, but going into a community where people don't want houses built in one of the most sustainable locations, that's where I'd love to see you earn your crust. Right? It's easy to shout at government. Everyone hates government, right? They're rubbish. They shouldn't get paid and all that. That's cheap activism. Go and start talking to people and say, I know you don't want houses near you, but if we don't build them here, we'll put them in a less sustainable location, and that will cost the planet. So it's not just down to me to convince people, and I don't want to end up in that situation. It's not just down to me. It's up to me to get communities to talk to themselves as well. That is much more grown-up place leadership.
Well, that's leadership for you. We have a number of students who are, this is my last question before we go to the audience, and we have a lot of students listening in, and I'm sure they'd be very interested to know